Welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Zone. I'm your co-host, Tom Spitalere. Bob is off on assignment tonight. He's working on a huge assignment, and we'll discuss that right before we announce our guest tonight. The Paranormal Zone is set up to bring in people who are active in the paranormal, research in the paranormal, but research in UFOs, Bigfoot, and other things that go bump into the night, and other interesting studies in the paranormal. And tonight's guest is going to be one of the best guests we've ever had on this show. He's been on one of my other shows long ago, and this guy's got a wealth of information. So without further ado, I want to introduce Stephen Sacalarios, independent researcher. He also has studied reincarnation and many other things. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Tom. It's good to talk to you again.
Yes, it's great talking to you, too. So, Steve, a lot of our guests we have guests from all over the place, and guests and listeners, they said to me, hey, can you do a show on reincarnation? Do you have anybody? Yeah, I find the fact, I go, oh, wait a minute, I do actually, and he's a very famous person. Well, almost famous.
Almost, yeah.
Well, actually more famous, because you told me once before he published more writings than his brother did.
It would have been famous if he hadn't published anonymously, yeah.
Right, or 100 different pen names, someone told me once before.
Yeah.
So let's get into reincarnation with you, Steve. So who are you really?
All right, well, that depends on how deep you want to go with that, but I've been studying reincarnation from the perspective of Eastern mysticism since like 1973, when I was like 19 years old. I raised an atheist, and then I did a complete 180, and I started investigating the different world religions. And among them, I read the Bhagavad Gita, which has a lot about reincarnation, and it just seemed perfectly natural. I didn't struggle with it at all. I just accepted it,
Yeah.
So I went on with that for a number of years, went to college, got a master's in counseling, studied death and dying, but I didn't have any idea that anybody was researching it in the Western world, scientifically. I had no idea at all. And in 1997, I decided I would have a documentary, because I started a video company, and I said, I don't want to get totally wrapped up in business. I want to have something creative going on so I don't lose my creative edge. So I said, I don't know what it's going to be. I just woke up one morning, I said, that's going to be about reincarnation. And, I don't know who I talked to at night, that kind of gave me the idea, or, because my mind's a blank. All I know is I woke up and I had the idea, right? So I did that. It's called In Another Life, Reincarnation in America. It took me 5 years to produce on a very slim budget. I think I did a pretty good job because I had my own video equipment and stuff. Mm-hmm. And that was released in 2003. It got aired I wrote to every PBS station in the country, and one of them took it in Denver. And it also got distributed through Films Media Group to universities. So it had a little bit of credibility. And I started from there. I did a few radio interviews. My first one was with Shirley MacLaine, my very first interview.
Oh, that must have been interesting. The Shirley MacLaine?
Yeah, and
wow.
No, not like Shirley MacLaine next door, but yeah, she had her own radio podcast back in like 2003 or whatever it was, and I got on there. But anyway, so I started researching my own case, and I found out about it in 2005, and I started really researching it in earnest in 2009. And that was a 19th century writer named Matthew Franklin Whittier. I was looking for something else. I'd been told in a psychic reading that I'd had a female lifetime as a writer on the West Coast around 1930, somewhere in there, and I still believe that's true, but I haven't been able to identify it. So I was looking for that, looking for names, and I ended up finding Matthew Franklin Whittier online just by accident. I saw the picture, had hardly any information on it. I looked in the eyes, he looked just like me, and I said, that's me, so research went on from there.
So, for our local guest up here in Essex County, that's obviously a very famous name. For our United States guests, that some of those people may know who Matthew Franklin Whittier is. But since we're now overseas, because this is a podcast, who was Matthew Franklin Whittier?
Well, he was the younger brother of the famous Quaker poet John Greenleaf Whittier, who is well known in New England, at least. He wrote Snowbound, was the big poem that made him famous, but he was also an abolitionist, brilliant poet. Matthew was his younger brother, and he was rather different. But the people that keep the Whittier legacy kind of look at him, they have a lot of false information about it. He's kind of thought of as the black sheep of the Whittier family and kind of a literary hack, and there isn't a lot about him. And there's only one literary series, which was a satire that he's known to have written. And when I started researching him, I felt that all that was wrong. But then I started proving it. I started finding vast amounts of literature that he had written, almost all of it anonymous. So I had to trace from one pseudonym and one periodical to another, to another, to another. I now have well over 3,000 of his published works. So, I have a vast legacy of his. And I know a lot about his life and a lot about his work. But I also was able to prove that I am his reincarnation, which wasn't easy.
So, Matthew Franklin Whittier was born July 18th, 1812. Same year as the War of 1812. And died in 1883 at the age of 70, according to what I see online.
That's correct, yeah.
And Matthew Franklin Whittier, the younger brother of the fireside poet John Greenleaf Whittier, otherwise known to historians solely as the author of Satire of Anti-Slavery, featured Ethan Spike for Hornbury.
Ethan Spike, that's right. That's the only series they really know about, or at least that they did know about until I came on the scene and showed them a few more, I think. I just found I found out that he started publishing when he was 12 years old as a child prodigy in 1825. They don't know anything about that. And when I try to talk to them, they won't talk to me. So there's a lot I'd love to share with them, but they won't. They're afraid of the reincarnation angle, I think.
Well, from looking at it from an outsider's perspective, a lot of historical sites do not usually welcome in the paranormal or, the outside world of thinking.
No, it's understandable.
And it's very understandable.
Even if it wasn't reincarnation, they would not want to see Matthew Franklin Whittier, though, I don't think. So it's a double whammy.
Well, I see some pictures of Matthew Franklin Whittier here, and I know you. I've been in your presence. And I can see a resemblance, the hairline and everything.
Yeah, it's pretty. The only thing is the nose, and what's kind of interesting about that is he hated his nose. I just found some more evidence for it recently because it was long and it had kind of a bulbous tip on the end. And I actually remember when I was him, kind of sitting and kind of unconsciously rubbing the tip of my nose, kind of hoping that thing would go away. Well, that's the only feature I actually don't have. I'd be a dead ringer for him physically if it wasn't for that. My nose is a little bit more, a little bit shorter. So I think that he wanted to get rid of that so badly that when I reincarnated, he was able to kind of tone it down, So I guess.
No, it's really interesting. It's really interesting when you look into this stuff. I mean, and I said this off air to you, and I've said this on air before, but I've had past life regression done, and I've gone back to the 1870s or so, and I mean, one of my protectors murdered me. I mean,
I wanted to prove this, so I was really, because I had. In my documentary, when I worked on my documentary, I found a lot of proof cases of different kinds. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to apply the same rigid criteria to my case and see if I couldn't prove it. So one of the most recent things I did was to go to my diary, all of which was written before, I only used the part that was written before I found Matthew, which was before 2005, right? Mm-hmm. And I went down and recorded some of the, aspects of his life and his mind, which I consider to be part of the higher mind. So philosophy, his worldview, his sense of humor, the way his mind works, all those things I consider to be part of the higher mind, which I believe persists, right? So I got quotes out of my diary that represent each one of these different parameters. Then I went back in and I found matching quotes from Matthew Franklin Whittier's writing. I don't mean like verbatim matching, but where he expresses the same worldview, where he expresses the same values, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I can line them up, point for point for point. I have the same higher mind that Matthew had. It hasn't changed. So I was able to objectively, prove that to a pretty strong degree.
Well, that's interesting. That is real interesting. Now,
So
how many
other things I did, the first thing I did was to use the method that some of these other people had used, and that is you have to record past life memories or impressions, and I include feelings and, emotions along with that. So any past life memory that I had, I have to record it and date it, And then once it's recorded and dated and documented, I go into the deep historical record and I see if I can validate it. And I was able to do that on a number of occasions, and some of the memories are pretty detailed, and I was still able to verify that they were accurate. So to me, that's the real gold standard. And the other one I was talking about where I compare the higher mind, that's kind of an additional proof.
Mm-hmm. So, I didn't know this at all. I know where John Greenleaf Whittier is buried, but Matthew Whittier is also buried in Amesbury?
It's in the same cemetery. They're all in a row there. I'm trying to think of the name of the cemetery. But,
Union Cemetery, but
that's right.
He's buried right near.
They're all buried in a row, and I think they're all new stones because they're all uniform. I don't think they all were exactly the same before. So somebody's completely redone them. Matthew is basically at the far end, away from John Greenleaf Whittier.
Oh, okay.
That surprised me. Yeah.
Okay.
I've been there several times. And, I hoped that, maybe I'd have some kind of experience, when I was there. But really nothing. I mean, I had philosophical thoughts about how interesting it is that I'm kneeling 6 feet above, the body that I used to experience life in and so forth. I even went there and read for Willie, who we know.
Yeah.
He did the camera work. And I read a piece about past life memories that Matthew had written, kneeling there on Matthew's grave, with the tombstone in the back. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but I've never had any kind of flashbacks or any experiences there.
Well, have you ever had any flashbacks of you as Matthew?
Yeah, several, and that's how I was able to prove the case, is I had several of them, some of them under hypnosis and some of them not. And, I was able to. Most of them you can't verify because they're real personal things.
Right.
Most of them are very emotional and they're very personal, and there's not the kind of things that are, unless it happens to show up in a diary or something, you're not going to be able to prove that. But there were a very few that I was able to substantiate.
Oh, very interesting. No, this is extremely interesting. Now, how many poems do you think Matthew Whittier wrote?
I found maybe 30, 40, something like that, 30, somewhere in there. It's hard to tell because sometimes he wrote poems that were embedded inside a piece of prose, inside a story. The person would stop, almost like a musical where the guy stops and sings a song, and he would stop and, recite a line of poetry or something. But as far as standalone poems, which are not part of text, I still say there must be 30 or 40 of them.
Mm-hmm. Someone told me because he used it close to 100 different pen names, it could be a lot more than that.
Well, I figure that I have over 3,000. That includes some novels. And a significant amount of it is poetry, so I'm probably way underestimating. Mm-hmm. But I think he wrote every day. So if you sit down and do the math for somebody that lived for 70 years and started publishing when he was 12 years old, you got 60 years almost of of writing every day, I probably have, a tenth of his output, even at 3,000. I have one letter, physically, I have one letter of his in my collection, and maybe another 10 or so that are copies from various libraries.
Yeah.
But he must have written thousands and thousands of letters, and, there must be I'm sure there's things floating around out there that I've never seen.
Now, I just found something very interesting. Let me see if I can lose it. You got a blog out, a YouTube video, it looks like?
All kinds of stuff. I've been doing this for years and years. Well, since 2009, 2008, something like that.
It shows you, it says Matthew Franklin Whittier's 4th of July message. And it shows you with an old newspaper. What's that all about?
Well, his 4th of July message and also his New Year's messages are kind of radical. He was a radical abolitionist, and he was a social activist for a lot of different causes. So, his stuff is pretty radical. But then again, there's also a lot of stuff that was plagiarized, excuse me, of his. And some of those plagiarists were famous, which we'll get into in the second half here. I think that's probably one of them there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I've done a lot of video blogs, a lot of, I started my written blog, way back. You go back to like 2003, something like that. I started the website in 1998 to support the documentary in progress. So, I'm all over the internet. And the fortunate, I guess it's fortunate, is that my name is kind of unusual. So you put if I was John Smith, you get a lot of other people, but as Stephen Spitalere, you put that in Google, and I'm all over the place.
Oh no, you get because I went to look up Matthew Whittier, and
you get a lot of that too. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. You get a lot of information doing that also. He originally spelled his name with one T. I found that because there's one letter that has his full signature. Normally he would sign M.F. Whittier, but there is one letter that he wrote in the 1830s that has his full signature, and it's spelled M-A-T-H-E-W. But everybody has spelled it double T. It's double T on his tombstone. The obituaries were kind of mixed, both, versions. But depending on how you Google it, if you Google it with one T, you get most of my stuff. If you Google it with two T's, you'll get a little bit more of the other stuff that's out there.
It's really interesting. Now, I read somewhere, and correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't he also speak at that poet from Maine that passed away? Didn't Matthew Whittier speak at her service? Someone told me.
I don't think so.
What was her name? The famous poet from Berwick.
Yeah, I'm not sure who you mean.
Berwick, Maine. Sarah Owen Jewett, I think it was.
Yeah, she went to his funeral.
Oh, she went. Okay, so the information.
And it was on the website about her that I first found out about him, because there was a page for him in her social circle on her website. It's not there anymore, but that's where I first saw his image.
So Sarah Owen Jewett went to his funeral.
Okay. Right. Along with Annie Adams Fields, the two of them, they were both friends.
So obviously, if Sarah Owen Jewett went to his funeral, they were not only friends, but obviously she had a lot of respect for the work he had done.
I guess so. She went with Annie Adams Fields, and I don't know which of them was tied to Matthew, but I think it probably would have been Sarah Owen Jewett, and that Annie went along with her being her friend. That's my guess. But I don't really know. All I know is she was there. I can't draw too much from it. I certainly felt like it, because that was the website I got on, and I said, I don't know what this is, but this feels very familiar to me. That was my feeling. That's why I looked for it, because I didn't find the page that had his picture right away. I just felt that there was something very familiar about it, and I wrote to a friend of mine who's kind of psychic, and I said, I feel like this is something. I've got a hit here, but I can't figure out what it is. So he was the one that went in and found Matthew's own page and sent it to me.
Interesting. I just find this stuff really fascinating.
Well, let me tell you, like one of the memories. I'll use a kind of a shorter one. Here's
Yeah.
going to take too much time, but just to give you an idea, this was not under hypnosis now, because some of them, one of the really strong ones was, but that takes a little longer to tell. So I'm researching the Boston Chronotype, which was the abolitionist newspaper in Boston around 1846 to about 1849. And was run by Elijah Wright, who was a friend of John Greenleaf Whittier. He was right in the core of the American Anti-Slavery Association. He was like the secretary, their first secretary, and he was an abolitionist and an editor. So I knew that Matthew had contributed some of the Ethan Spike letters to that newspaper. I had that information from like the basic, stuff that I'd read, like there's a biography on him and so on. I'd read that. So I was looking up information on the Boston Chronotype, and there was a listing I was looking at pictures, and there was a picture of a man in profile, just a thumbnail. And I clicked on that, and I recognized it, I'm having a senior moment. I'm trying to think of his name right now. But anyway, I read a little bit about him, and he had edited for the Chronotype, and that's all I knew about him. So I enlarged the picture, and I looked at it, and I had this experience where he came alive, and George Bradburn, now the name's coming to me, his name is George Bradburn. He came alive, and he was also an abolitionist, and he turned towards me, and a smile broke out of his face. And I knew him, and I thought to myself, I said, like a warm hearth on a cold day. I don't know if you ever heard that expression. I'd never heard it.
No.
And finally, like years later, I looked it up and found out, that was something people actually said, an actual expression, a warm hearth on a cold day. So that came to my mind, and I felt like we were really close friends, but I had no proof, right? So I found a memorial that his wife had written after he died. And at first it talks about how he was close with John Greenleaf Whittier. And I was kind of disappointed because I said, well, that's not what I was feeling. What I was feeling was a very tight, best buds kind of bond. But then finally down at the end, it said he worked for 14 years in the Naval Department at the Boston Custom House. Well, Matthew did the same thing. He was there. So they were part of a small group of men who worked there for 14 years at the Boston Custom House, right?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden it made sense that I would feel like they were really close friends. And then they had a whole bunch of things in common. They'd both been abolitionists. I found that Matthew had praised him to the Elijah Wright in a little description of one of his speeches, one of George Bradburn's speeches. And they both had a sarcastic sense of humor. They were both spiritualists. There was something really interesting in that memorial. And his wife, Frances, said she'd asked him if he was afraid to die when he was in his last illness. And he said, no more than I would be to walk into that other room. So, so he was a really high spiritual guy, Well, they would have been close friends. So it was pretty much verified. I don't have a letter where they're talking, about their friendship or anything, but just the fact that they had all that in common, they had that regard for each other, and that Matthew they worked together for 14 years, it's pretty much verified. So that's a case where I didn't have quite what you would call a cognitive memory, an intellectual memory, but the emotional memory was so strong, that bond with this person, and he was my best friend. That's our evidence. And I had no reason to believe that, but I was able to prove it from the historical record. There's no way I could ever have read that memorial before, so it was obviously something that didn't influence me. So that's just a small example of the way I proved some of these things.
No, that is very interesting how you go about proving things. And so, has it changed your life finding out that you're reincarnated brother of a big, well-known poet in New England?
Well, that part hasn't particularly. It's hard to say because there's been a lot of water under the bridge, and I don't know, which part might have changed my life, but I will say that subconsciously, the more that I delved into his writings, because I copied all of his writings and typed them all up, like 3,000 of them, so I would, really immersed myself in his world. my subconscious identity started to kind of meld. It was kind of like I was reacting as though I was Matthew almost. And I would go back and start reading these things and reading these old newspapers, and I really felt like I was back there. I would stop reading and wake up and say, wait a minute, this stuff isn't current. I was like experiencing it as though it was current events, So it's subtle, but it definitely has affected me, and I'm not sure I would recommend it to everybody, because there were some things about Matthew's life that were negative, in the sense that I think he was very frustrated and even bitter, about his works being plagiarized and some of the other things that he experienced in life and wasn't treated fairly. And those emotions would start to get in me and start to affect me, and I would start to express those kind of feelings. And I'm thinking, well, where's this coming from? Why am I feeling like this? And then I realized, wait a minute, I've been totally immersed, in this literature for the last 4 or 5 weeks, and it's starting to bleed through a little bit.
No, that is very, very interesting. Now, before we get moving on, do you have a book out?
I have a bunch of books out.
Okay. I see one here called...
currently trying to promote is the one that deals with our next topic. Which,
okay.
As soon as we get to that,
Yeah. How about this book?
Is give the website, the general website, and then everything's on there, right?
Yeah.
So,
also, too, Steve, you have a book out. You have a book out on Kindle called Matthew Franklin Whittier in His Own Words.
That's the first one, yeah.
Oh, okay. So that was
and
a
there's
little
a
bit
sequel, and the sequel is called Matthew Franklin Whittier in His Own World. And the two of them are very, very long. They're like encyclopedic. But because I wanted to be very transparent about my whole research process. So like everything I encountered as I encountered it, frustrations and discoveries, and even if I found out the discovery was wrong, it's all in there, so that in the future, after I pass on, anybody can get in there and they can evaluate the whole thing.
So let me get this straight. I just noticed something. The book on Kindle.
Yeah.
Okay. You said it's very long. Did you take your writing from? Give me a minute. I just drew a blank. Guy from Rhode Island had ties to Haverhill. I talk about him all the time.
Well, I don't know. There is one scholar that studied Ethan Spike. Really, more than Matthew. I mean, he's more of an Ethan Spike scholar than he is a Matthew scholar, and his name is Larry Glatz.
No. Did you get your writing skills from Howard Philip Lovecraft? And the reason why I asked you was because one of these books was over 3,000 pages.
Oh, yeah.
And H.P. Lovecraft was nefarious or notorious for writing long, because they got paid by the word back then.
No, that's not why I did it. Why I did this is that I kept finding new evidence.
Yeah.
This book was 200 pages, and I said, well, that's as much as I can find. That's a good, comfortable length. And back in 2012, when I published it, right, I said, well, that's comfortable. And then I found more stuff. And then I found more stuff. Every day I was finding more of Matthew's writing. And every time I found a piece of his writing, I had to adjust everything because I found new facts in it. Right, so everything had to change to accommodate the new things that I found, and I was finding new stuff every day. So I just kept adding it in and adding it in and adding it in. Finally, when I moved here to Portland, I said I'm going to stop and start a new book, because I want this new book to be about, did I have any experiences here? When I'm in Matthew's world, did I recognize anything? Did I have any flashbacks? So that's how I started the second book. And then I started finding new stuff, and that's like over 1,000 pages. So we're talking, when I say pages, I'm talking about word pages. It's longer, if you get into Kindle and you look at the length of the book, it's longer, but, just words, just pages in Microsoft Word, we're talking 2,400 for the first book and over 1,000 for the second.
So you published about 11 books?
Something like that, yeah. Because I have Matthew and his wife Abby's poetry. I have their short stories. I have a novel that I wrote about their courtship and their life together. That's a whole other topic, because it turned out Abby is my soulmate, and I'm still in contact with her, and she's helping me from the other side. So that's a whole other topic there.
Yeah, I'm looking up the books right now, so they can get them on Kindle. And what's the website they can go to?
Well, it's www.ial, which is for In Another Life, which was my documentary. So ial.goldthread.com.
All righty. So let's get into the next book.
Yeah.
It looks like the book you wrote is The Sacred Carol, Rediscovering the True Authorship of the Christmas Classic.
Yeah, of a Christmas classic.
All right, so why don't you explain to our listeners how this came about? In fact, I'm going to probably buy this hardcover book. It looks real interesting.
I think you'll like it. So, the deal is that back in 2006, this is 1 year after I had discovered Matthew, I'm blogging, the same blog I've got now. I've been, that blog is huge. So I'm just blogging away, and all of a sudden an impression comes to me. And I said, I think that Matthew had something to do with the writing of A Christmas Carol. That's what came through. And I said, I'd better document this publicly just in case, it ever becomes, handy for reference, right? Mm-hmm. So it's in there, and that's on archive.org. So that's been archived, so that's a part of the public record that I said that. And over the years, I was able to prove that Matthew and Abby Whittier were the original authors of A Christmas Carol. So there's different ways of going about proving that. And one of the ways I proved, first, I wrote a long, long paper on this, which is free. It's posted online and posted on Academia EDU. And it proves, first of all, that Charles Dickens was a sociopath, that he couldn't possibly have written A Christmas Carol, especially not within 6 weeks like he said he did. And then I go in and give forensic evidence that shows that, that he wasn't the author. And then at the end, I present pieces by Matthew and Abby Whittier that show that they plausibly could have been. And a lot of people read that paper. They're still reading it. Over Christmas, a whole bunch of people looked at that paper on Academia EDU because I get stats. Every time somebody looks at it, I see, I see a number. But nobody ever writes to me about it. They just look at it silently, and then they don't ever do anything about it. So I was thinking, there's something else I haven't done. I had gotten into Charles Dickens' handwritten manuscript online because it's held by the Morgan Library Museum, and they had put it online in 2011 in very high resolution, zoomable, so you can go in and look at each individual word if you want to. And I had already found some evidence in there. Abby made me do that. I could feel she was guiding me to do that, and we found one very nice piece of evidence in there. But I had never tried to transcribe the whole thing. I said, what I'm going to do now that AI has the capability of looking at images, and you can upload complete PDFs and complete documents to it, and you can really argue with it, and it has logic capabilities. This was when it was 4.0, and then it went to 5. Mm-hmm. So I said, what, I'm going to, and I had a nice big donation for my work, like a $5,000 donation from a wealthy friend. And I said, the best way I can use this $5,000 is to, pay for AI, get in there, and transcribe that whole manuscript, all 66 pages, and all of the redacted words, because there's a lot of heavy redactions in that manuscript. And I wanted to know what was underneath them, because my theory is there should be some of Matthew and Abby's original writing underneath those redactions. And I wanted to see if I could find them. The gold standard is, can I find uniquely American expressions hiding under there that Dickens erased, right? That he would never have used. Well, so I got with AI, and I didn't just believe whatever AI said, because I understand about hallucination, Mm-hmm. I argued with it. It was my brainstorming partner. So I remember I argued with it. We studied one word for an hour and a half to try to figure out what was underneath those redaction marks. I also found a way to peer underneath those redaction marks with software. So I could lighten them up and change the contrast, and I could get in and see what the letters were underneath a lot of times. So when I did that, I would then I would screen capture that and send it up to ChatGPT and say, what do you think this is? And it would give something. Sometimes it hit the nail on the head, and sometimes it was way off, So we would argue. I say, no, I don't think it's that, because it says, and I also got very good at recognizing and becoming familiar with all of Charles Dickens' letters. in his handwriting. I got real familiar with his handwriting. And I was able to, 900 man hours I put into this thing, 2.5 months, 10, 12-hour days every day. And I was able to transcribe the whole thing. Well, there's a ton of evidence on here. Just absolutely. It was way more than I thought it was going to be. I proved it, hands down, it's proved. It's just a matter of getting somebody to actually sit down and read the book. Plus, I put the entire transcription in the appendix. So the entire transcription of the handwritten manuscript of Christmas Carol is in that book in the back. And it's the only place you can get it right now. There's somebody that's done about the first third online, but I'm the only person that's done the whole thing so far as I know.
And how many pages was the handwritten one?
Well, it's in his handwriting, it's 66 pages. In mine, I'd have to go look at it and tell you how many it is. I don't remember, but it might be 100 or something like that.
Wow.
So it was a big job, but again, it was very rewarding because, boy, did I prove it, So, like I said, it's just a matter of reading it.
How do you think, so you feel the Christmas Carol was originated, according to what I'm reading here and what you just said, Matthew and Abby Whittier, correct?
Yeah.
So how did...
But the most powerful, the spiritual part of it really was Abby.
Okay.
Because she was a mystic and an occultist. And she was a spiritualist before the word spiritualism really was coined, in like 1830s basically. So the word spiritualism, as I understand it, kind of came in with the Fox sisters around 1850. But obviously the occult principles were known way before the Fox sisters, right? So she was a Catholic mystic, but I think she was kind of like Thomas Merton in that she was very open to other traditions. Hermeticism, Kabbalah, Vedanta, and, the occult. So she was very, very sharp in all these things. And what she originally wrote in A Christmas Carol was all intended to be authentic, So you've got earthbound spirits, you have astral travel, you have a high rate of vibration for advanced spiritual beings on the other side. You've got the spiritual hierarchy. I mean, it goes on and on. You've got karma in there, spirit guides. I've written down some of them. Life review, right? All those things were intended to be authentic occultism. So it was only Dickens that turned it into a ghost story. It was never a ghost story when Abby wrote these things.
Right. So how did Dickens get his name on this?
Well, what apparently happened is that Abby died in 1841. And I think their idea was to spread this around so that people would read it and identify with Ebenezer and go through his transformation process vicariously. And by doing that, they would transform the world. I think that was the idea. It was quite naive of them, but they were young. They're like 20 and 24, whatever. So they were kids, basically, very idealistic. So she died, and in 1842, a few months later, in January, Dickens came to America to launch his first American tour. Matthew was a fan. We know that because he wrote about it to John Green McWhittier. He'd been publishing sophisticated stuff since he was a boy of 12 in 1825. So the literati knew him, and they knew him through John Green McWhittier because he traveled in the same circles. The little brother tags along, right? So he knew the transcendentalists and so on. But then I learned that he was personal friends with Oliver Wendell Holmes. Matthew was. So now he would have almost for sure been invited to the big welcome dinner where 150 young American authors were invited to this welcome dinner, and there were speeches and everything. But Oliver Wendell Holmes, if he was personal friends with Matthew, would have given him a personal introduction, almost for sure. I can't imagine him not doing it, with Matthew being a fan if he was there.
Right.
So there's our opportunity that Matthew had to hand this manuscript over to Dickens with the hope that Dickens would spread it all over the world. What he didn't understand was that Dickens was not who everybody thought he was. Dickens was an imposter. He was not really a social reformer. He wasn't even a great author. He was a plagiarist who took other people's ideas or other people's novels and jazzed them up for the public and sold a whole bunch of books by doing that. But he himself was not really the literary genius, and he was not really a social reformer. That was just PR. Kind of like a big corporation has a public relations branch that wants everybody to think that they're philanthropic. Well, Dickens was kind of had his own.
Right.
Like that, right? It's just, he was just, an early version of a corporate, philanthropic firm.
So that's
how Dickens got hold of it.
Yeah.
He took that manuscript back with him.
That's interesting because let's go back a little bit in the Matthews life, okay?
Yeah.
And then we'll get back to the Dickens thing.
Sure.
Chase's History of Haverhill, which you probably have seen, have you?
I think so. Is that the one that John Greenleaf actually wrote and then somebody else finished?
You got it.
Yeah, okay. I'm familiar with that.
John Greenleaf Whittier actually wrote it and then gave it over to his publisher, which was Chase Publishing.
Right.
And Whittier never signed off on it, so he just attached his name to it.
Exactly, yeah.
And lo and behold, it became Chase's History of Haverhill. But if you read the book, like I have more than once, because that's just 600 pages of fact after fact after fact after fact, and I'm a local historian, you can actually see some of Whittier's, if you read Whittier's writing, you can actually see some of his own writing in there.
Sure, yeah.
Especially when you go look at, there's probably sections of Chase you're probably not as familiar with, so.
I haven't read it. I've seen little parts of it, and I know a little bit about the history.
All
But I
right,
haven't
so this is what I find interesting. So I've read a lot of town histories, okay? They usually talk about, when the town was settled, Haverhill, 1640s, settlement period, French-Indian War, later the American Revolution, and, it didn't go to Haverhill, but men from Haverhill fought in Lexington and Concord and Bunker Hill and,
Right.
wherever. And then it goes right through to 1860, the beginning of the Civil War. That's when it ends, right?
Okay.
Okay, but as you know from John Greenleaf Whittier's poetry, he talks about things like the two-headed snake, haunted bridge, right? And a few of those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, yeah, he goes into the legends of
Yep.
England, yeah.
There is, and I forgot what exact page this is on because I don't have my notes with me because I wasn't even going to bring this up. But they talk about the wild man of East Haverhill.
Ah, no, that's a new one on me.
It's
I know there was a kind of a simple boy. I remember that Spoon or something like that, but I don't remember the wild man.
Yeah, the wild man of Haverhill. I happened to find it when I was doing Haverhill Public Library had brought me in, not to get off subject, but real quick, to talk about haunted Haverhill. Okay? So I'm like, how am I going to do that? Because I don't give out private homes. Okay? So what I did was I took a map of Haverhill. Okay?
Yeah?
Pretty easy to do, right?
Yeah?
And I pinned all the sites that I have for paranormal. I had a guy on my radio show in Haverhill about Bigfoot sightings in Haverhill and UFO and paranormal. And I pinned it to a map.
Okay.
All right. Well, I call it...
Like UFO hunters, kind of a
Right.
scientific approach.
Yeah, I called it the Canosa Triangle.
Okay.
And that's what I did the talking. Now, what it really should have been was the Whittier angle. Okay, and why is that? Because most of this is covered in Whittier's poetry, but I knew the other organizations involved with Whittier were not big into the paranormal, and I'm friends with them. So out of respect, I called it the Canosa Triangle.
Okay.
But in this area, you have the haunted bridge that Whittier wrote about. All right? It's called The Wild Man of Haverhill. It's written...
Now, was he a physical man or kind of an apparition, or what was he?
This was written... who wrote this originally? Found this in there. What is this guy? Peter Muse put it in one of his books.
Okay.
All right, because I just looked it up. So back in the summer of 1826, a man named Andrew Frink came down with fever. Since this was long before the invention of aspirin, his fever grew and Frink became delirious. Eventually, a fit of madness, he ran from his house and disappeared. Shortly after that, citizens of Haverhill discovered a wild man lurking in the nearby woods. Now, Andrew Frink is actually buried at Hilldale Cemetery.
Okay.
So I just find this, you read things like, the wild man in the woods of Haverhill, and it comes from Whittier. And Whittier's done so much on cryptid stuff. It's, I always called him the first paranormal investigator, at least the first cryptid writer.
I think he kind of took it with a grain of salt, though, don't you?
He probably did, but when you write not just one, you write the two-headed snake. You're writing the poetry, the lights in Gloucester Harbor, and there's a whole bunch of them.
I think their mother was into this kind of stuff. There's a couple instances in the historical record that indicate that she was, interested in the paranormal. So and they did have a book of magic in the house as one of the texts. So.
I did not know that. I learned something new tonight.
Go look up all the, because there's a list. I think Picard has it. Samuel Picard has it.
Yeah.
In Whittierland, I think. But anyway, there's a list of all the books that were in the Whittier farmhouse, and one of them is a book of magic. So, and there's also stories that she went to seances with a friend. I can't remember the friend's name right now, but that's part of the historical record. And then there's Annie Adams Fields described something that the Whittier people would very much like to distance themselves from. So I think maybe I won't repeat that. But if you look at Annie Adams Field's book about Whittier, you will find another interesting example in there.
Okay. So we've covered some good. So let's get back. So Whittier's family has been, throughout the years, written some great published stuff, but never got it published. Would be a safe thing, huh?
What were we talking about now?
The Whittiers as a whole, between Matthew and John, they had a lot of published, writings, but two big ones, The Christmas Carol and The Chase's History of Haverhill, were never published by them.
There was others. I mean, I'm not talking about all of the people that plagiarized Matthew and Abby, because there were others, and some of them were famous. So, but this book just focuses on Christmas Carol. Right.
No, I get that, but I'm just saying, I wonder if that was common back in the day.
Oh, that people would, not get credit for work? Or
correct, and someone would steal their work and everything.
Oh, it was very common. It was like the Wild West. And the problem is that Matthew and Abby both, they were like the perfect storm for plagiarism, because they were brilliant, they were very original, but they wrote anonymously, and they didn't defend their work. So if somebody did steal it, they didn't come out and publicly confront them. Mm-hmm. So what Abby just ignored it completely. What Matthew would do is to protest in code. And when I say code, I mean in literary references that you have to know, how he's writing in order to interpret it.
Okay.
He would protest in subsequent writings, and kind of almost as though he was either writing to himself, just out of frustration, or he was trying to leave a record for posterity, so that anybody that ever studied it would be able to, if they realized he was writing in code and they figured out how he did it, they'd be able to see, what he was saying and understand that he'd been plagiarized. So I've done that because I'm his reincarnation. I could feel it first. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, this is actually one of the proof instances. There's a biography of Matthew Franklin Whittier that's a student thesis. It was published in 1941, and there's a lot of errors in it. There's a whole lot of mistakes in it, but a lot of that's left out of it. But in the back, there are, I think it was 5 examples of Easton Spike, these satirical letters. And as soon as I started rifling through them, I had a very strong impression. And I said, he used to embed coded references in these that nobody knew were in there, that there's that he's writing on different levels, and there was a deeper level that was coded that people didn't know. I had that right away, and right. It turned out to be very much true. And but it's true of all of his writings. And some of them, there's one where in 1868 in the Portland transcript, the January 4th edition, he had seen Charles Dickens give a public reading in New York City. He wasn't able to, because Dickens gave one here in Portland, and he gave others in Boston, but apparently Matthew wasn't able to get tickets. So he did get one in the nosebleed section in New York City. And he wrote a review for the Portland Transcript, January 4. And in that review, he uses code to say that Abby was one of the original co-authors, and other things. So he uses code in that review, but nobody's ever picked up on it except me.
All right, interesting. So if somebody wants to get this book, how do they get this book?
Well, here's the website. It's thesacredcarol.goldthread.com. And that will give you the link to buy it on either Amazon or Ingram Spark, depending on if you want softcover or hardcover.
Hey, one last thing I want to go over.
Yeah.
So up until last year, we do trails and sales, and sometimes I'll do from the Garrison House or something like that, where I dress up and I read scary poetry. Okay.
Is there any chance I could get in the Garrison House?
I don't know. I mean, I could probably. I'm no longer involved with the Garrison Association.
Please try for me if you can, because that figures very strongly in one of my memories.
So I will. I'll talk to the board president and I'll let you know. They are open. I'll have to get, when they announce the open dates, I'll send them to you. They're just open to the public. They haven't announced them yet. I do get them still, so I'll send them to you. But I used to do this thing called Tales from the Garrison House. And I'm going to do it again this year, but I got to find another cool place to do it at. It'll be Tales from something, where I dress up and I read weird things.
Okay.
Some wittier, some other. One of my favorite reads is from this guy that no one's ever heard of.
Yeah.
Edgar Allan Poe, The Raven. Have you ever heard of that one?
Matthew Franklin Whittier.
Oh, that's another one of Matthew Franklin Whittier.
That was his. Poe had nothing whatsoever to do with it. He scooped it, stuck his name on it, took Matthew's pseudonym off, put his name on, and claimed it.
Oh, interesting.
And I can prove it.
Oh, you can?
Yeah.
That sounded like a quick proof, huh?
That might take us another show, but
we'll have to bring you back on to talk about other famous writings of Matthew Franklin Whittier, because it sounds like there's a lot of them out there.
There's a lot. I said 3,000 words, but there's at least 4 other major plagiarists of Matthew and Abby that we haven't talked about. So Poe was one of them.
Oh wow! So I'll have to really think of things. Don't I?
If you can get me to the Garrison House, let me ask you this real quick. You've been inside, right?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen anything like a bronze figurine of a dancer in there?
No.
A ballerina? No. Okay.
No. So at one time there was.
Well, I seem to remember staring at that. See, what I remembered was that after a funeral for Abby, it was like a special funeral held after the fact for Matthew and his friends, that the reception was at the Garrison House. It makes sense because they had events there. There's like a big room there,
right,
that they had events in. So the reception was there. I remember the couch that I sat on, and there's a table in front of me, and on that table is this figurine, bronze figurine of a dancer doing a pirouette, and it was inside a bell jar. And Matthew stared at it to hold it together, to keep from bolting out of the house because he could barely stand to be in there, because his friends they didn't know Abby. And they're laughing and joking. They'd come along, but they didn't know her. So they're all laughing and joking and cutting up and having a good time. And he's like, he can't stand it.
Right.
So what he wants to do is and what I remember is I think he's got his back to a window. So he's facing the interior of the house, and he wants to run up and run to his left and then maybe take a left again out the door.
Yeah.
But he's sitting there and he's staring at this figurine, and Abby was a dancer, among other things that she could do.
Yeah.
So it reminded him of her, and he was just staring at this thing just to try to control his urge to run out. Because her mother had set the whole thing up, and it would hurt her feelings if he left, see? All of this I remembered, and it was not under hypnosis. It just, but somebody wrote to me and asked me, said, "Do you remember anything about the funeral?" And I said, "No." And then it all came to me, and this detail was very intense. So I'm thinking, if I could find that figurine under that bell jar anywhere, it could have been bought by somebody else. Could be an antique store, who knows? But if I could find that thing, it's kind of unusual, and it would be a very strong piece of evidence.
Right.
But I've never been able to get permission to get in there. I found an old description of the interior of the Garrison House, but I've never been able to get in or talk to anybody that's been in it even. So this is a first for me.
Right. So I'll send you the dates when they're open to the public.
Fantastic. Yeah.
All right, Steve. We're going to have you back on. This was a great show.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it too.
Talk to you again. It's been a while.
It's been a while. Maybe we can get together and go for a cup of coffee. Meet.
I love it.
You're still up You're still up about an hour and a half away from me.
Yeah, I'm still in Portland, so.
So maybe we can meet somewhere a little further south of that.
Yeah.
For coffee.
Just let me know.
let
Maybe
you
Portsmouth or something.
Yeah, Portsmouth. That's. I usually give away the last Friday. Sure, Tom. The last Wednesday of every month. There's a paranormal meetup group. Willie belongs to it.
Yeah.
That meets in Portsmouth for dinner. If you ever want to come down, it's open to anybody in the paranormal.
Anyway, so sounds good.
It's open to anybody in the paranormal
Awesome.
or anybody in general that's interested. Ghost, UFOs, reincarnation. We have psychics that go there, researchers, ufologists. Yeah, it's a mixture. 10, 12, 15 people usually.
Sounds good.
Unless it's like January and it's ice cold out, there might be only 6 of us that make it.
I'll be there. If I get an invitation, I'll be
Yeah, no, it's always it's the 4th Wednesday of every month, unless there's a holiday. Then they do it on the 3rd Wednesday.
Yeah.
And it's called the Seacoast.
I have oral surgery coming up on the 2nd of February. Other than that, I'm free and clear. So.
Right. So the last Wednesday of January, I will be. Willie's usually there. Lynn Nickerson's there. So come on down. All right.
All right.
And I want to
just drop me a line or something to firm it up.
I will. I'll drop you a line that day. Remind you a day before. All right. So I will talk to you soon. Thank you for tuning in. I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. What a great show this was, Stephen. This was a knockout. So thank you very much. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. We got a lot of stuff going on. The Essex County Ghost Project, along with Paranormal NH, is moving into opening up a couple different UFO research groups in a couple different states. So keep track of that. And we'll be coming to your state real soon. I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight. Good night, everybody. I'm heading back to my crypt.